My name is Delthea Freida Bell Brockington. And it's funny because if you talk to most of my family and friends, they don't know that my first name is Delthea. My first name I was named after my father's mother, whose name was Delthea. Why they didn't name me Frida Delthea, I'm not sure, but I proudly have that name. But I was born and raised in Alexandria, Virginia. My first address that I know of was 314 North Alpha Street, not far from here. And my parents are both from Alexandria. Um, they both were born and raised in Alexandria as well. I went to Charles Houston Elementary School. Um, and when I graduated from Charles Houston Elementary School, the schools were still segregated. So my parents, along with some other parents, didn't want me to go to a segregated high school that they went to. So, unbeknownst to a lot of people, they paid a tuition to the District of Columbia for me to go to school in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown. So, there were probably about 6 of us that did that. We caught a bus at Queen here in Washington Street to 12th and Penn, and then got another bus that went up to Georgetown. And I think a couple of years after that, when the schools were finally integrated, some of the kids' parents said, "Well, you got to come back." And I said, "Please, I'm getting ready to go to high school. These are my friends." So there were about 3 of us that were able to continue on, and I graduated from Western High School in Georgetown, which is now the new Duke Ellington. But Alexandria was, and still is, I mean, we still own property on Queen Street. And when I knew I was coming in for the interview, I said, let me just ride through the city to sort of reminisce about the city because it has changed so much. The city in this general area was mostly African American. Just 1 block away on the corner there of Alfred and Queen was what we call Miss Blue's drugstore. And in our community, we had everything, which was beautiful. A lot of entrepreneurs. We had physicians, attorneys, drugstores, corner stores, and movie theaters. In fact, the block that I grew up on when I moved from Alpha Street on an 1100 block of Queen Street, which is where I lived until I got married at age 21 and moved on. There was some barbershops, some carryouts, and a movie theater on the corner. And so we had everything in our neighborhood. And so riding through now, the area has changed so very much. There are very few African Americans in Old Town Alexandria. That's why I really pride the fact that we still have our family home. It's rented, but it's still a beautiful city. I mean, just to think about it. A city right outside of Washington, D.C., the hub of what's known all around the world. Not only is it a famous city, but it's beautiful. It's there with not only the monuments, but there's the river, and it's just a gorgeous place. It was a fabulous place to grow up in. And as a matter of fact, my grandson goes to St. Stephen's, so he's still in Alexandria. But just it had so many wonderful memories. Around the corner was the physician, and back then you could get a house call. I mean, it's unbelievable, but you could get a house call. Are you kidding me? And just you write out a prescription, and then just a block away was the drugstore where you could get it filled. You didn't have back then. It was People's Drugstore, and now it's CVS. So it's just so many delightful memories growing up in the city. And there's a group of us that we meet once a month. It's called the Parker Gray birthday group. So we meet once a month, and we go out to lunch and we reminisce and we fellowship, because it's such a wonderful, rich history that needs to be preserved. Um, I look when I look at Charles Houston, it's now a community center, yeah, and then just across the street, which is the African American Museum now, used to be the only library that we had at that point. Then, of course, now this beautiful library we have here now. But at that point, at one point, that was the library for us. But you could say that within a several mile radius, not only was it rich in history, but rich in the kind of environment that you would want to raise your family in. And that's still the case now. Even though the city has changed, it still has a lot of wonderful things here in the city. Um, the Urban League, the NAACP. Um, my father was on the PTA. It was a lot of community kinds of things that were phenomenal and very instrumental in developing and crafting the individuals that we became as adults. One of the folks that is in our birthday group is Judge Dawkins. And we laugh because I currently now live in Fort Washington, and he talks about how he almost moved to Fort Washington. I said, yeah, and you wouldn't have been a judge had you moved to Fort Washington. So, but it's just that kind of, even to this day, the camaraderie and the fellowship and the community that we have as a bond, which is special. And it's not just with African Americans. After the schools integrated, we expanded ourselves, and so we have friends, from all ethnicities, and still maintain a lot of wonderful, beautiful relationships. But like I said, from where I lived on Queen Street, there was everything. There was the American Legion, which was a social club, and then there was, like I said, there was beauty shops and barber shops and carryouts and restaurant. There was a restaurant on the corner. I like to tell the story when I finished school and started working at the Hoffman Building, which is not that far. Some of my friends would want to come over and have lunch. And I said, well, some of those places I couldn't go to. And they said, what? And they said, you couldn't go to these places? And I said, no, we weren't allowed. We could go into the Five and Dime, which was down on King Street. You go in on one side was King Street, on the other side was on Washington Street. And they had a stand-up counter where you ate at, and that was for coloreds. And they said, are you serious? And these are some of my white friends. Are you serious? And I said, yes. I said, but, it's funny because just across the bridge into D.C., they knew nothing of that. But it was across the Mason-Dixon line. And so, growing up, we had such a nurturing environment that we were totally oblivious to all that. It didn't bother us because we had everything we needed in our neighborhood. And actually, that's something that a lot of kids today don't have. They hardly even know their neighbors. We knew everybody in our neighborhood, whether it was on the north side of the city or the south side of the city. And like I said, a lot of those bonds and friendships carry on to the day. Even though we're knocking the heck out of 80, I'll be 77 this year. But it's wonderful to know that that those bonds still carry on. And I make sure that I communicate and pass that kind of information on to my grandchildren, because that's important, that you, just like what you're doing now, documenting the history, that if you don't know anything about your history, you're subject to repeat some mistakes and errors, or not really appreciate what you have because you don't know what you had. Yeah, it's still a wonderful city. You know, one of the things that Char wrote in her article that she did for Black History, and was talking about my great grandfather, who I never knew, because he was killed while working on building the Masonic Temple. And so it's nice that my dad was told that, and he, by his father, and then he's passed that on to me. I passed that on to my daughter, and I've also passed it on to my grandchildren. So, that was something that was important. Not only that, I worked for the government for 37 years before I retired in 2003, and while working there, I also started to work as a realtor, and I still do that. And so, owning property is something that is very rich and very important. And one of the stories that I remember that my great grandmother used to tell me, who used to work for Mr. Smoot, which is Smoot Lumber. I think they just went out of business not long ago, but they were a mainstay. And so I remember the story her being told that the house that they lived in was 510 North Alfred Street, and it was sort of adjacent to Polyprim Cleaners. It's on the corner of Alfred and Orinoco. And they had a beautiful house there. And so he told my great grandmother that her name was Mary. And he said, Mary, you probably have paid for this house 5 times over, renting. I want you to buy it. And she did. And it's those types of things that hold true even to this day. That it's nice to know that those kinds of traditions are not only shared but carried on from generations to generations, which is very important. One of the persons that was very prominent, and it still is, and that is Ferdinand Day, who his daughter Gwen friends with. She still lives in Alexandria, and she's part of our group that we have a birthday lunch with. And it's so proud to know that not only was he respected, but now he has a school that's named after him. And it's those kinds of things that are enriching and important to know that those types of things will then be carried on for generations to generations. When you get to get a school named after you, that's pretty significant. Yeah, or street. Yeah, but and I still have friends that live in Old Town. Some of them are recognized as living legends. My close friend is Linwood Campbell, and he's been on many, many boards. Linwood, he's got about 50 stories that he can tell you to keep you occupied. He's smart, he's intelligent, and he's still very involved in the community. Um, uh, Mr. Elliott, who was just recognized as well, him and his wife, Brenda. Um, and it's nice to know that that you still have some people living in the neighborhood that when you're doing some things that are positive, that you can be recognized for. To me, just the name, give the title of a living legend is pretty impressive to me. Yeah, and I laugh because I'm like, you're what, a living legend? Said no, but it's true that when you can do things to have impact on others in your neighborhood and your community, is impressive. Yes. The things that were important to us, not only the neighborhood, was President's Day. Always a big deal. It's not as much now as it used to be, but that was huge because if you could think about um, groups in schools and bands or whatever that came from all over the area and sometimes from somewhere in the country that would participate in the George Washington Day parade that went down Washington Street. The whole town was pretty much shut down for that. And we always enjoyed that event. And it's still not as much as it used to be. Now it's President's Day. It used to be George Washington because he was the first president. And we so proudly in the state of Virginia can wear that honor that we had the first president of the United States of America. Um, but yeah, when you think about the different things that were special in the community, and that was collectively, for everyone. Um, but like I said, you had all kinds of business. Like, for instance, another friend of mine is who went to school in D.C. with us was Terry Green, and Terry's parents own Green's Funeral Home, which is a funeral home that is still in existence, been in existence for decades, and is very well known. Um, and But it's just that the thing that I referenced before, that when you have people in your community who have businesses, who are entrepreneurs, who are part of the community, who enrich the whole community for decades, and they carried on from generation to generation. That's huge. That's something that's very important. And it's nice to see that those businesses are still in existence. Um, but, when you get 76, you don't remember everything. Probably when I leave, I'll probably think about, 15 other ones. But those ones that come to mind, right away. Yeah. Of course, there is St. Joseph's, which was right up the street, around the corner from Charles Houston. And I always like to tell the story that um, my cousins, they all went to St. Joseph's. Well, one group of them. There were 7 of them, and I was an only child. So I would go there after school, and I would always hope that, and he's very well known in the community as well, and that is Andy Evans. He's a well-known comedian. He'll probably be one of the ones, and he could tell some stories. I wouldn't even begin to be able to remember all the ones that he tells. But whenever Andy would walk me home, I would have to say, "Oh Lord, am I going to make it home without fighting?" Because he would mess with everybody in the neighborhood. But it's just those kinds of things that, where you almost knew everybody in every block. And I'm not sure where you grew up, but growing up in a community where you could go on any given block and know, almost everybody on that block. And that they were not only knew you, but they knew your parents, they knew your grandparents. As a matter of fact, I currently go to Alpha Street Baptist, which is a historical church. We now have, it's grown from a couple thousand. I think there's 10,000 members that go there now. It's huge. As a matter of fact, this Sunday, because it's so large and we can't house everybody for Easter Sunday, we're having our services at George Mason. So we'll be able to all pile into the arena there for church services. Yeah. So, but it just shows you that how people really embrace the things that are still in the neighborhood. Because I drive from Fort Washington over to, and it's very important to me because not only do I go there, my daughter and my grandchildren go there, but my grandmother was also a member of that particular church. So we have a lot of rich traditions that we carry on throughout the community.